not being motivated and not feeling like actually sitting down and learning a language, even when you want to learn that language, I think is extremely common. So I'm basically going to address in this video what to do when you don't feel like language learning, why that happens, and how, in my opinion, motivation is a treat. So if you do like this kind of educational content on language learning, definitely hit the subscribe button, but let's go. So what is motivation, first of all? Motivation, there's different kind of levels of the definition depending on how intelligent we want to get into it, but we'll start off saying that motivation is basically emotionally feeling like doing something. So if you're demotivated, for example, you don't feel like doing it in the moment. So for example, if we're learning Italian as an example of a language and you don't want to do any study at the moment, you just have no emotional investment in actually doing it, even though your goal is to learn Italian. And obviously this is a big problem because if you're not actually going to sit down and do the work, you're never going to get anywhere, which is why I think, this topic is a popular thing to talk about. So something right off the bat I'll address is the difference between short and, is my microphone? There we go. Sorry, just making sure it's actually on properly. Is the difference between short and long-term motivation. So there are actually two types. I'm going to explain the difference. Short-term motivation is basically what you emotionally feel like doing right now. So that definition we just gave about emotionally feeling like doing something, that's actually short-term motivation. It's the short-term motivation. Long-term motivation is actually what your goal in the future would be. So for example, short-term motivation would be you feel like doing something right now. Long-term motivation would be your reason for doing it because you want to achieve a future goal. When we're demotivated, we're not losing long-term motivation, we're only losing short-term motivation. Think about it, if you actually lost long-term motivation for something, you wouldn't even want to achieve the goal at all. You'd actually want to stop learning Italian or whatever just because you don't actually want to do that anymore. Not because you don't feel like studying right now, but because you don't even care about that goal. That isn't what's happening. You still want to learn a language, you just don't feel like doing it right now. So how do we actually solve this problem knowing that short-term motivation is what we're missing? So, in my opinion, I've made the title of this video, Motivation is a Treat. What I actually mean now that you're more intellectual about how motivation works is short-term motivation is a treat. So most of the time, I guess the word most you can kind of take with a grain of salt. A lot of the time or some of the time, somewhere in between that, you don't actually feel like doing stuff. You don't feel like exercising, you don't feel like language learning, you don't feel like anything like that, anything that's like delayed gratification. And of course, if you only work when you feel like doing something, a lot of the time you're just not going to do stuff. So if you only work when you have that kind of short-term motivation, you emotionally feel like doing something, you're going to be inconsistent, you have no discipline basically, you're going to start dopamine hunting, which basically means whenever you have low dopamine, you start looking for activities that are just instant gratification, like junk food, entertainment, etc. And that puts you in like a negative spiral of a rut. If you want to learn more about ruts, by the way, I'll have my video on them pop up on the screen right now. But anyway, yeah, I want you guys to realize that you don't actually need short-term motivation to language learn or to work on anything. Even if you don't feel like doing something right now, you can actually still do something to keep making progress and to maintain consistency. So I want to introduce a word here called discipline. And this word a lot of people don't understand what it means. It also gets a lot of hate on the internet. I'm basically just going to explain it right now. Discipline is doing the hard work even when you don't feel like it, but we can actually go further than that, because if you've watched this far in this video, you're actually a bit smarter than the average person, and I can actually give you an even better definition of discipline. Discipline is actually obeying your long-term motivation and disobeying your short-term motivation when they disagree. So for example, if you don't feel like language learning right now, but you still want to learn a language, like for example, you want to learn Italian, you just don't feel like doing anything right now. That would be an example of your short-term and long-term motivation clashing. If they agreed, then obeying your short-term motivation would actually get you to your long-term goal, but they don't. So what we actually need to do here is use discipline, and we're going to obey our long-term motivation and disobey our short-term motivation. We're going to obey the fact that we want to learn a language, and we're going to disobey the fact that we don't feel like doing anything right now, if that kind of makes sense. So that's the more intellectual definition of what discipline is. And it gets a really bad rap because people say, oh, it's toxic, it's contributing to poor mental health. That's not actually true at all. They're not using the correct definition of discipline. If you think about it, discipline is actually the skill of listening to your emotions, just listening to the emotions that actually care about you and are on your side, which are of course your long-term motivation, your short-term motivation, and your emotions in that sense are just, they're with the wind. They have no kind of investment in you actually being successful. If all you did was ever only listen to your short-term motivations, you just eat junk food whenever you felt like it and do all this other crap. So what I want you guys to do is basically to start small. I want you to make yourself a habit tracker. I'll have that video pop up on the screen right now where I've talked about how to make a habit tracker, and literally just go from there. Start easy, keep the habit tracker small with a few tasks, and every day, even if you don't feel like language learning, you can still do that 1 or 2 habits on the habit tracker. So for example, you might have 1 deck of flashcards, you can do that. Read 1 page of a book, you can do that. Watch 1, vlog of people speaking in the language learning, you can do that. Even if you don't feel like it, just 1 task is doable every single day. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Subscribe, and I've got a link to my Discord in the description. But yeah, have a good one.